My next real job was in 2011 at iMasters. Currently, now it's VisionWorks, so I'll just use VisionWorks from now on. So right before I got there, the district manager, she's already hired me, but she asked me, what are you going to do about Steve? Steve was the lab manager in the store. He'd been with the store for 20 years, went the company for 20 years. And the question was, what are you going to do about Steve? I talked to my doctor, like right after I got hired, and literally one of the first things out of his mouth are, what are you going to do about Steve? I'm getting trained at a different store across town by a lady named April, who I'm still friends with. And she asked me, what are you going to do about Steve? And I keep in mind, I haven't even met Steve. I don't know who Steve is. Everyone's planting a seed in my head that Steve is a problem. So I meet Steve, and the first week I noticed with Steve, he's taking out trash and he is horribly inefficient about how he takes out trash. And he ends up needing to make 3 runs to get his trash out. And after watching this a couple times, I pulled Steve aside and I said, hey, Steve, I want to show you a trick. And the trick involved a dolly, a trash can, and an empty box. And with those 3 things, I showed him how to take out his trash and his cardboard all at the same time, instead of in individual units. And instead of making 2 or 3 trips, he took all his trash out in 1 trip. And this was the first step in getting Steve to buy into the things that I was selling. And what you discover, if you make an employee's job easier, if you make an employee's job better, and you do it immediately, like if you have an immediate impact, the people that you impact, all of a sudden, they have more interest than what they had before. So in other words, what else can you teach me? What else can you show me? 6 months later, the old store manager comes into the store and he's chatting on the other side of the office, on the doctor side. He's chatting with a couple techs. And I walk over there to be polite. And I'm like, hey, how are you doing? My name is Mark. One of the first things he says is, how's that guy Steve treating you? And it was funny because my wife will tell you that I get a tone when I'm angry. When I get a tone when I want to get my point across. I don't yell and scream, but I get a tone. And I can tell you, I had my tone when I had my answer for this old store manager, because what I told him, I said, you know what? Steve would run through a wall for me. Steve will do anything for me. And I get emotional even thinking about it, because to this day, Steve and I are friends, and Steve would do anything for me. And I'll give you an example. I left VisionWorks. 6 months later, I'm working at iMart Express, and I'm going to the bank. Outside of the bank, Steve is talking to someone I don't know. I walk up and Steve says to his friend, oh, you've got to meet this guy. This is the best manager I've ever had. He's written a book. He's a genius. You got to meet him. And keep in mind that sounds like bravado, but those are Steve's words. Those are not my words. And what I found interesting was, at this point, Steve had been with the company for 23 years. And he'd probably seen more managers than he could count during that time frame. 23 years later, what he's saying is, a guy I knew for a year and a half is the best manager I ever had. That's the promise of the illusion of competence.